Hey there, and welcome to Crime for Sleep. I know you're having trouble falling asleep, so let me keep you company with true crime stories from around the world. Before we dive in, I'm curious, where did you first hear this one? If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Now get comfortable, and let's get into tonight's case. Story 1. I had just dusted off the last surface, the scent of lemon polish lingering faintly in the air. The room was quiet, each object placed with precision, yet a subtle tension lingered just beneath the order. My fingertips tingled as I brushed them against the glass tabletop, a chill spreading up my arm. The room felt untouched, pristine, yet something invisible brushed against my awareness. I stepped back, and in that moment the shadow of a fingerprint caught the light. An unwelcome mark that changed everything. The print wasn't mine. I knew this with the certainty that comes from cleaning the same surfaces week after week, month after month. My hands move in practiced patterns, wiping away traces of daily existence with methodical care. But this mark belonged to someone else, someone who had pressed their thumb against the glass with deliberate pressure, leaving behind an oil smudge that my cloth had somehow missed. I stared at the print, my breath forming a small fog on the glass surface beside it. The house around me seemed to shift, settling into itself with small creaks and sighs. These sounds had become familiar companions during my work, but now they felt different, weighted with possibility. Someone had been here. The family I worked for traveled frequently. They had left instructions on crisp white paper, their handwriting neat and uniform: water the plants, check the mail, dust the surfaces. Simple tasks that filled my afternoons with quiet purpose. They trusted me with their space, their belongings, their private corners and hidden drawers. I had never violated that trust, never lingered where I shouldn't, never touched what wasn't meant for me. But someone else had. I moved through the house with heightened awareness, my footsteps muffled by thick carpeting. Each room revealed itself slowly, shadows pooling in corners despite the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. The kitchen held the faint aroma of coffee, though I hadn't made any. A single mug sat in the dishwasher, clean but somehow out of place among the other dishes I remembered loading there during my previous visit. The living room felt different too, though I couldn't identify exactly how. The couch cushions appeared properly arranged, the throw pillows positioned with care. Yet something about the space seemed altered, as if the furniture had been moved slightly and then returned to its original position by someone working from memory rather than knowledge. I climbed the stairs, my hand trailing along the smooth banister. The master bedroom door stood ajar, exactly as I had left it, but the air inside carried a scent I didn't recognize. Not perfume or cologne, but something more subtle. The smell of another person, their presence lingering like an echo in the stillness. The bed was made with hospital corners, the way I always left it, but the indentation in one pillow seemed deeper than it should have been, as if someone had lain there, thinking, waiting. I approached the nightstand where a small framed photograph usually sat. The picture remained in place, but it faced a slightly different angle, turned toward the bed rather than straight ahead. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me from my observations. A text message from the family, checking in from their vacation. Everything going well, they asked. I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. What could I tell them? That their house felt haunted by the presence of someone who shouldn't be there. That object seemed shifted by invisible hands, that I was beginning to question my own perception of what was real. Instead, I typed back, all fine, house is secure. But even as I sent the message, I knew it wasn't entirely true. I returned to the living room, drawn back to that fingerprint on the glass table. Under closer examination, I could see it belonged to someone with larger hands than mine, someone who had pressed their thumb against the surface with enough force to leave a clear whorl pattern. The print was fresh, the oils still visible under the right light. Someone had been here recently, perhaps even while I was working in other parts of the house. The thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I began to retrace my steps from earlier in the day, trying to remember every sound, every moment when I might have been distracted. Had I heard footsteps upstairs while I vacuumed the lower level? Had a door closed somewhere while I ran water in the kitchen sink? The ordinary sounds of an empty house suddenly took on sinister possibilities. I checked the locks on all the doors, testing each handle with careful pressure. Everything seemed secure, but locks could be picked, keys could be copied. The family had given me a spare key months ago, trusting me with access to their most private space. But who else might have that same access? A former employee, a family member with complicated relationships, someone with knowledge of their travel schedule. The afternoon light began to fade, casting longer shadows across the polished floors. I should have finished my work and left, but something kept me there, searching for answers to questions I couldn't fully articulate. I found myself opening drawers I had never opened before, looking through closets that were supposed to remain undisturbed. I told myself I was checking for signs of intrusion, but part of me knew I was crossing lines I had never crossed before. In the home office, I discovered a desk drawer that wouldn't close properly. Inside, papers were shuffled in a way that suggested someone had rifled through them quickly, looking for something specific. Bank statements, insurance documents, personal correspondence. Nothing seemed to be missing, but the organization was wrong, subtly disturbed by unfamiliar hands. I photographed the fingerprint on the glass table with my phone, though I wasn't sure what I planned to do with the image. The police would ask questions I couldn't answer. What exactly had been stolen? Had I witnessed any actual crime? Could I prove that someone had been in the house without permission? My evidence consisted of feelings, impressions, the indefinable sense that something was wrong. As darkness fell outside, I turned on lights throughout the house, pushing back the shadows that seemed to gather in every corner. The familiar space began to feel foreign, as if I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. Someone who had walked these same hallways, touched these same surfaces, breathed this same air while the family slept safely in their distant hotel beds. I called their number, listening to the phone ring across whatever distance separated us. When they answered, their voices sounded small and far away, filtered through digital compression that made them seem almost unreal. "Is everything all right?" they asked, and I could hear concern creeping into their tone. I described the fingerprint, the displaced objects, the subtle wrongness that permeated their home. They listened with the patience of people who trusted my judgment, but I could sense their confusion. What exactly was I reporting? What did I expect them to do from hundreds of miles away? "Maybe we should call the police," they suggested, but their voices carried uncertainty. What would we tell them? That someone had touched a table and moved a photograph, that the house felt different in ways that couldn't be quantified or explained. We agreed that I would stay until they could arrange for someone else to check the house, a friend or neighbor who could provide a second opinion. But as I settled into their living room to wait, surrounded by their belongings and their trust, I began to question everything I thought I had observed. Had the fingerprint really been there when I started cleaning, or had I simply missed it during my initial pass? Could the objects have been displaced by settling, by changes in temperature, by my own movements through the space? Was I creating a mystery where none existed, finding patterns in randomness, because the alternative was accepting that sometimes houses just feel different for no reason at all? The friend arrived near midnight, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a practical manner. She walked through the house with me, examining everything I showed her. The fingerprint was still there, clearly visible under the right light. The papers in the desk drawer remained disheveled. The photograph still faced the wrong direction. But as she looked at these things, I could see doubt in her expression. These were such small disturbances, such minor disruptions. In her eyes, I was probably an overly conscientious employee, someone who had spent too much time alone in an empty house, allowing imagination to transform ordinary imperfections into evidence of intrusion. "I'll stay the night," she offered, and I accepted gratefully. But as I drove home through empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving something unresolved, some truth that hovered just beyond my ability to grasp it. The family returned early from their vacation, cutting short their trip to address what they called the security concern. I met them at the house, apologizing for the disruption while simultaneously defending my observations. They were gracious but clearly puzzled, walking through their home and finding everything essentially as they had left it. The fingerprint had been wiped away by their friend during her overnight stay. The papers had been reorganized. The photograph had been straightened. All the evidence I had carefully preserved was gone, erased by well-meaning attempts to restore order. But in the master bedroom, as we stood discussing what might have happened, I noticed something new. A single hair on the pillowcase, dark and coarse, nothing like the family's lighter coloring. I pointed it out quietly, and we all stared at it in silence. "It could be anyone's," the husband said finally. "A hotel maid, someone who changed the sheets before we left." His wife nodded agreement, but I caught her exchanging a look with him, a moment of communication that passed between them like a secret. They knew something they weren't telling me, some piece of the puzzle that would make everything make sense. I never worked for that family again. They paid me for my time and thanked me for my vigilance, but the calls stopped coming. I understood. I had seen too much, asked too many questions, crossed too many boundaries in my search for answers. But sometimes, in the quiet moments of other houses, other jobs, I think about that fingerprint on the glass table. I wonder whose thumb pressed against that surface, what they were looking for in those scattered papers, why they chose that particular bed for their rest. I wonder if the family ever found out who had been there, or if they already knew and simply chose not to tell me. The truth remains somewhere in that house, embedded in surfaces I will never clean again, hidden in shadows I will never illuminate, and perhaps that's how it should be. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some questions are better left unasked, and some fingerprints should simply be wiped away and forgotten. But I remember, and in remembering, I carry with me the weight of knowing that even in the most carefully ordered spaces, chaos lurks just beneath the surface, waiting for the right light to reveal its presence. Story 2. The curtain puffed outward, but without the gust to justify it, as if breathing out of sync with the room. My steps fell in their usual pattern, yet the carpet absorbed them too quietly, like it was stretching to listen. The painting on the wall, always straight, hung crookedly now, an angle unnoticed between each blink. A cup lay on its side in the sink, still damp from a washing I didn't remember. I closed the cupboard once, then again, the subtle click echoing back from where no walls stood. And then a book fell, pages fluttering like a gasp in the heavy air. The spine read something about forensic psychology. I hadn't touched that book in months, or was it weeks? The pages had fallen open to a chapter on memory reconstruction, the text swimming before my eyes like words seen underwater. My finger traced the margin where someone had written notes in pencil, my handwriting, but I couldn't recall making them. Memory is not a recording device. It reconstructs, it fills gaps. The annotation felt foreign in my own hand. I think it began with the neighbor, the one who lived in the house with the blue shutters, though sometimes I remember them as green. She had come to my door holding something wrapped in tissue paper, her eyes darting past my shoulder into the hallway behind me. "I found this," she had said, or maybe she said, "I lost this." The words blur together now, like watercolors bleeding into each other. What I remember clearly is the weight of the object when she placed it in my palm. Cold, metallic, a key, but not one that belonged to any lock I recognized. The detective had asked me about keys during our conversation, had asked me about a lot of things, actually. I have the transcript somewhere, buried in a drawer that sticks when I try to open it. His questions came in waves, each one pulling me deeper into details I wasn't sure I possessed. "Did you notice anything unusual about her behavior in the days before? Had she mentioned feeling watched or followed? When was the last time you saw her leave the house?" The last question haunts me because I can picture her leaving the way she pulled her coat tight against the wind, how she paused at the gate to look back at her front door. But I can also picture her not leaving at all, standing at her window with her hand pressed against the glass, watching something I couldn't see. Both memories feel equally true. The key sits on my kitchen counter now, next to a coffee mug that's grown cold. I've tried it in every lock I can think of, my own doors, the garden shed, the mailbox. Nothing. It's too small for a house key, too large for a jewelry box. The metal has worn smooth in places, as if it's been handled frequently, worried between nervous fingers. I remember the detective's hands, how they moved when he spoke, gesturing toward invisible evidence, pointing at conclusions that seemed to float just beyond my comprehension. He had asked to see the key, turning it over in his palm the way I do now, holding it up to the light as if its secrets might reveal themselves through transparency. "Interesting," he had said, though his tone suggested the opposite. The forensic psychology book has a section on witness reliability. I've read it several times, each reading revealing details I missed before, or maybe the text changes when I'm not looking. The book discusses how trauma can fragment memory, how the mind protects itself by obscuring certain truths while amplifying others. The witness may genuinely believe in contradictory accounts of the same event. I wonder if I'm the witness they're writing about. The neighbor's house has been empty for 3 weeks now, or 3 months. The blue shutters, definitely blue, I'm certain now hang slightly askew, and newspapers have accumulated on her front step despite my efforts to collect them. I've been bringing them inside, stacking them on my kitchen table next to the key. The headlines blur together: missing person reports, community safety meetings, requests for information. None of them mention her specifically, but they all feel connected somehow. I found her journal yesterday while watering the plants she'd left in my care. She had asked me to watch them while she was away, though I can't remember her mentioning a trip. The journal was tucked beneath a pot of wilting violets, its leather cover soft with moisture. The entries are sparse, written in the same careful handwriting I recognize from grocery lists. She'd occasionally ask me to help her read when her glasses went missing. Most of the pages discuss mundane things: appointments, weather observations, reminders to call her sister. But there are other entries, fragments that don't quite fit. The same car again today, different driver. Someone has been in the garden, the gate latch was moved. The key doesn't fit anymore, changed the locks. He knows I know. The pronouns shift throughout the journal, sometimes referring to multiple people, sometimes to no one at all. I've read these entries dozens of times, searching for patterns, for connections to the key that grows warm in my palm from constant handling. The detective returned last week to ask more questions, or maybe it was last month. Time has become elastic, stretching and contracting based on my attention rather than any external measure. He wanted to know about the journal, about whether I had noticed anyone unusual in the neighborhood, about my own relationship with the missing woman. Missing woman, that's how he referred to her, though I'm not sure when she became officially missing rather than simply absent. You were close, he had observed, not quite a question. Were we? I remember brief conversations over the garden fence, occasional favors exchanged, the comfortable distance of neighborly politeness. But I also remember longer talks on her front porch, cups of tea that grew cold while we discussed books and weather and the small mysteries of daily life. Both versions feel accurate, though they can't coexist. The transcript of our conversation sits on my coffee table, pages spread like tarot cards waiting to be read. The detective's questions reveal assumptions I hadn't noticed during our actual conversation, assumptions about my knowledge, my involvement, my reliability as a witness. You mentioned seeing her leave that morning. Can you describe what she was wearing? Did you see her return? Are you certain about the time? My answers read like fiction now, too detailed to be memory, too vague to be invention. I describe her blue coat with brass buttons, the way she favored her left leg when walking, the sound of her gate closing with its distinctive squeak. But I also express uncertainty, qualifying each detail with phrases like "I think," and "it seemed like," and "if I remember correctly." The key has developed a patina from my handling, its edges worn smooth by my thumb. I've begun carrying it with me, a talisman whose purpose remains opaque. Sometimes I find myself standing at locked doors, holding the key toward the keyhole without inserting it, as if proximity might reveal its intended use. The forensic psychology book discusses the phenomenon of false memory implantation, how suggestions can become indistinguishable from actual recollections. I wonder if the detective's questions have created memories that didn't exist before our conversation, if my certainty about seeing her leave that morning is genuine recollection or constructed narrative. The mind abhors gaps, it will fill them with plausible fiction. I've started noticing other gaps, spaces in my own memory that feel deliberately obscured. The day before she disappeared, for instance. I can remember the morning clearly: coffee, newspaper, the sound of her radio playing through thin walls. And I can remember the evening television, dinner, the unusual silence from next door. But the afternoon exists only as a void, a pocket of time that resists examination. The detective had asked about that afternoon specifically. Did you see anyone visiting her that day? Any unusual sounds or activity? Where were you between noon and 5? I couldn't answer any of his questions with certainty, a fact that seemed to interest him more than any concrete information I might have provided. The neighbor's plants are dying despite my care. The violets have withered completely, their purple petals scattered across my kitchen windowsill like bruises. I water them religiously, provide adequate light, speak to them the way she used to, but they seem determined to fade, as if mourning their owner's absence. Or perhaps they know something I don't. The journal entries have begun to feel prophetic rather than historical. Her observations about being watched, about locks being changed, about someone knowing her secrets, they read differently now in the context of her disappearance. What seemed like ordinary paranoia has acquired the weight of genuine threat. But paranoia about what and from whom? The detective mentioned other neighbors during our conversation, people I recognized by description but couldn't name. The man who walks his dog at precisely the same time each evening. The woman who tends her garden in the early morning hours. The teenager who delivers newspapers with mechanical precision. "Have you noticed any changes in their routines?" he had asked. I hadn't, but now I find myself watching for variations, cataloging the subtle shifts in neighborhood rhythm. The dog walker has been arriving 5 minutes later each day. The gardening woman has started wearing gloves when she never did before. The newspaper deliveries have become erratic, sometimes missing entire streets. These observations feel significant, though I can't articulate why. The key has become warm against my palm, its metal absorbing heat from constant contact. I've begun to dream about doors, endless corridors lined with locks of every description, each one promising answers if only I can find the right fit. In these dreams, the key changes shape, sometimes growing larger, sometimes splitting into multiple copies, sometimes dissolving entirely just as I approach the correct lock. I wake from these dreams with the taste of metal in my mouth. The forensic psychology book includes a chapter on investigative psychology, the practice of analyzing crime scenes for behavioral evidence. It discusses how perpetrators often insert themselves into investigations, how they derive satisfaction from proximity to law enforcement efforts. The text makes me uncomfortable in ways I can't fully explain. The offender may present as an overly helpful witness, someone with detailed observations and strong opinions about the case. Am I overly helpful? My cooperation with the detective feels natural, motivated by genuine concern for my missing neighbor. But I can't ignore the possibility that my helpfulness serves other purposes, ones I haven't acknowledged even to myself. The empty house next door has acquired a different quality in recent days, not abandoned exactly, but expectant. As if waiting for something to happen, for someone to return, for a story to reach its conclusion. I find myself standing at my window, watching for signs of life, for movement behind those blue shutters. Sometimes I think I see shadows shifting in the upstairs windows, but they could be clouds passing overhead, or trees swaying in the wind, or the play of light on glass. Perception has become unreliable, filtered through anxiety and speculation and the persistent weight of unanswered questions. The detective called yesterday to inform me that they're expanding their search. He didn't specify what they're searching for, or where, or why their initial efforts had proven insufficient. His tone suggested routine procedure rather than breakthrough discovery, the methodical progression of an investigation that has settled into patience rather than urgency. "We may need to speak with you again," he had said before hanging up. The prospect fills me with equal measures of dread and anticipation. I've been rereading the journal, looking for clues I might have missed during previous examinations. The handwriting varies slightly from entry to entry, sometimes looser and more flowing, sometimes tight and controlled. The variations could indicate different emotional states, or different writing implements, or different levels of haste. Or they could indicate different authors entirely. The possibility hadn't occurred to me before, but now it seems obvious. What if the journal contains entries written by multiple people? What if my missing neighbor wasn't the only one documenting events in her house? The key doesn't fit anymore. This entry in particular suggests someone attempting to gain access rather than someone locked out of their own home. The perspective shifts from victim to potential perpetrator, from observer to participant. But participant in what? The key has grown heavier in my pocket, its weight disproportionate to its size. I've begun to wonder if its significance lies not in what it opens, but in what it represents. Evidence of planning, perhaps, or proof of intent, or simply the physical manifestation of secrets that resist verbal expression. The detective had photographed the key during our conversation, documenting its dimensions and distinctive markings with clinical precision. He had asked if I planned to keep it, if I considered it evidence, if I understood its potential relevance to their investigation. I had answered yes to all three questions, though I'm not sure any of my responses were accurate. The forensic psychology book discusses the concept of psychological evidence, the way mental states leave traces that can be analyzed and interpreted like physical clues. It suggests that understanding a crime requires understanding the mind that conceived it, that behavioral analysis can reveal patterns invisible to traditional investigation methods. Every action contains the seed of its motivation. I wonder what my own actions reveal about my motivations, about the thoughts and impulses I haven't fully acknowledged. My careful preservation of the key, my detailed observations of neighborhood changes, my willingness to cooperate with law enforcement, do these behaviors indicate genuine concern or something more complicated? The empty house has developed a magnetic quality, drawing my attention even when I try to focus elsewhere. I've begun timing my daily activities around opportunities to observe it, to watch for changes in its appearance or atmosphere. The accumulated newspapers have been removed by someone, though I didn't see who collected them. The plants in the window boxes have been watered, their leaves green and healthy despite weeks of apparent neglect. Someone is maintaining the property, but not living in it. The detective might find this information relevant, but I haven't called to report it. The omission feels significant, a small deception that has grown larger through repetition. Each day that passes without disclosure makes the eventual revelation more complicated, more suspicious. Why haven't I mentioned the maintained plants, the missing newspapers, the shadows I sometimes glimpse behind drawn curtains? The journal contains an entry I hadn't noticed before, written in pencil so light it's barely visible against the paper. He thinks I don't know about the key. The pronoun is definite this time, referring to a specific individual rather than a general threat. But who is he, and what knowledge about the key was my neighbor supposed to possess? I hold the key up to the light, examining its surface for markings I might have missed. There are scratches along the shaft, tiny imperfections that could indicate frequent use or deliberate alteration. Near the bow, almost invisible unless viewed from a specific angle, someone has etched what might be initials or might be random scratches. The markings are too small to read without magnification, too ambiguous to interpret with certainty. The detective returns tomorrow for another conversation. His call was brief, professional, offering no indication of what new questions he might have or what developments have prompted this follow-up meeting. I've spent the evening reviewing my previous statements, looking for inconsistencies or gaps that might have raised concerns. But memory remains unreliable, shifting each time I examine it. Details that seemed certain yesterday feel questionable today. Observations I thought I had made begin to feel like assumptions I had drawn. The line between what I know and what I believe has blurred beyond recognition. The key sits on my nightstand, catching moonlight from the bedroom window. In the darkness, it looks different, smaller and more fragile, like something that might break under too much pressure. I pick it up, feeling its familiar weight, wondering if tomorrow's conversation will finally reveal its purpose. Or if I'm the only one who doesn't already know. The forensic psychology book lies open beside me, its pages marked with annotations I don't remember making. The text discusses the phenomenon of unconscious knowledge, the way minds can possess information they haven't consciously processed. It suggests that witnesses often know more than they realize, that the right questions can unlock understanding that has been buried beneath layers of psychological protection. Truth emerges through careful excavation, not dramatic revelation. I close my eyes and try to excavate my own buried knowledge, to uncover the connections that have remained hidden beneath conscious thought. The key, the journal, the empty house, the detective's persistent questions, they form a pattern that feels almost familiar, like a song I've heard before but can't quite remember. Tomorrow's conversation will add new elements to this pattern, new questions to complicate the existing mysteries. But I suspect the answers have been with me all along, waiting for the right moment to surface, for the right pressure to bring them into the light. The key grows warm in my palm, and I finally understand that I've been holding the wrong kind of evidence. It was never meant to open a door. It was meant to open a memory. Story 3. It echoed softly, a single drop hitting wood. The sound shouldn't have been audible here, surrounded by the dry expanse of the attic. Yet its rhythm beckoned me, a pattern that felt both new and hauntingly familiar. The air was thick, laced with a dampness that didn't belong to this arid space. I moved cautiously, each footstep revealing hidden creaks under the dust-coated boards. With every drip, the oppressive silence pushed memories I didn't want to confront closer to the surface. I reached the corner where boxes were stacked haphazardly, and the sound grew louder, more insistent. This was impossible. The attic had been sealed for years, but the drip continued, relentless, reminding me of what I thought I'd forgotten. I hadn't heard that sound since before the doors were sealed. The logical explanation came to me easily. A pipe had burst somewhere in the walls, probably from the harsh winter we'd endured. The old house had always been temperamental with its plumbing, and I'd put off calling a contractor for months. The moisture was seeping through the ceiling boards, finding its way into the sealed attic space through some forgotten crack or gap. These old houses were full of surprises, pathways that defied architectural logic. I pulled out my phone's flashlight and swept it across the corner. The beam caught something metallic wedged between two cardboard boxes, a small tin container I didn't remember storing. The dripping seemed to originate from directly above it. When I lifted the tin, my fingers came away damp, confirming my theory. Water damage, nothing more. The dampness had that familiar basement smell, musty and organic, like wet leaves decomposing. But as I held the tin closer to examine it, something shifted in my peripheral vision, a shadow that moved independently of my flashlight beam. I turned quickly, heart hammering, but found only the familiar silhouettes of stored furniture draped in white sheets. The dripping had stopped. I convinced myself I'd imagined the movement. Stress did strange things to perception, and I'd been under considerable pressure lately. The house felt heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I set the tin back down and noticed my hands were trembling slightly. The silence stretched around me, thick as cotton. The first version of events unfolded in my mind with crystalline clarity. I'd come up here looking for old photo albums, something to occupy my restless evening. The house had been too quiet since I'd moved back, too full of spaces that echoed with my own footsteps. The attic represented a treasure trove of forgotten memories, boxes I'd sealed away during a different chapter of my life. I'd climbed the pull-down ladder with purpose, armed with good intentions and a desire to reconnect with happier times. The dripping sound had simply been an unfortunate discovery, a maintenance issue that would require attention but nothing more sinister. Houses aged, pipes corroded, water found ways to travel through the most unexpected channels. It was a perfectly reasonable sequence of cause and effect. The tin container held old photographs, their edges curled with age and now slightly damp from the lake. I recognized some faces, family gatherings from decades past, but others seemed foreign despite their familiar setting. There was something unsettling about the way the light fell across certain faces, creating shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. As I flipped through the photographs, a strange sensation crept up my spine. The dampness in the air carried a scent that wasn't quite right for a simple plumbing lake. It was metallic, almost sweet, with an underlying current of something I couldn't identify. My throat felt tight, and I found myself breathing more shallowly. One photograph in particular caught my attention. It showed the attic space itself, but configured differently than I remembered. The boxes were arranged in a different pattern, and there was furniture I didn't recognize. In the corner where I now stood, something dark stained the floorboards. The photograph was taken from almost exactly where I was standing now, as if someone had wanted to document this precise perspective. My hands began to shake more noticeably as I held the photograph. The dripping sound resumed, but now it seemed to be coming from multiple directions. I swept the flashlight beam across the ceiling, searching for the source, but the wooden beams appeared solid and dry. The sound was definitely there, though rhythmic, persistent, almost like a heartbeat. The second version began to emerge in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle assembling themselves without my conscious participation. In this version, I hadn't come to the attic voluntarily. Something had drawn me here, a compulsion I couldn't resist. The dripping wasn't water at all, but something else entirely, something that had been waiting patiently for my return. In this alternative reality, the tin container wasn't filled with innocent family photographs. The images showed scenes I didn't remember participating in, moments that felt simultaneously foreign and intimately familiar. My own face appeared in several shots, but with an expression I didn't recognize, a look of knowledge that seemed both terrible and necessary. The dampness against my skin felt different now, more viscous, more deliberate. It clung to my fingers with a persistence that water couldn't match. When I raised my hand to examine it more closely, the substance appeared darker than it should have been in the flashlight's white beam. The metallic scent grew stronger, filling my nostrils with each breath. I tried to step away from the corner, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The floorboards beneath me seemed to pulse slightly, as if responding to some rhythm I couldn't consciously detect. The dripping sound had synchronized with my heartbeat, or perhaps my heartbeat had synchronized with it. The distinction no longer seemed important. The photographs scattered from my trembling hands, floating down like autumn leaves to settle on the dampened floor. As they landed, I caught glimpses of images that couldn't possibly exist, scenes from angles that no camera could have captured, moments that stretched beyond the boundaries of the frames. In one image, I saw myself standing in this exact position, but the expression on my face was one of recognition rather than confusion. My phone slipped from my other hand, the flashlight beam spinning wildly as it fell, casting rotating shadows that transformed the familiar attic space into something alien and threatening. In the strobing light, the draped furniture seemed to move with purpose, shifting positions when the beams swept away from them. The two versions of reality began to merge in conflict, creating a disorienting kaleidoscope of possibility. In one moment, I was a concerned homeowner discovering a simple maintenance problem. In the next, I was something else entirely, a participant in events I couldn't quite remember, but somehow knew I could never forget. The dampness had spread beyond the corner now, seeping across the floorboards in patterns that defied gravity and logic. It traced designs that seemed meaningful but remained just beyond my comprehension. The air itself felt thick with intention, as if the space around me was holding its breath, waiting for some crucial recognition to dawn. I reached for my phone, desperate to restore the steady light that might anchor me to the rational version of events. But when my fingers closed around the device, the screen remained black. The battery had been fully charged when I'd climbed the ladder, but now it refused to respond to any combination of buttons or gestures. The silence pressed against my eardrums, broken only by the relentless dripping that seemed to echo from inside my own skull. I couldn't determine whether the sound was growing louder or whether my perception was becoming more acute. Both possibilities seemed equally plausible and equally disturbing. Without the phone's light, the attic plunged into a darkness that felt absolute and intentional. But somehow I could still see the photographs scattered around my feet, still make out the stains spreading across the floorboards, still distinguish the shapes of furniture that shouldn't have been visible in such complete darkness. The tin container had fallen on its side, spilling contents that were definitely not photographs. Objects rolled across the tilted floor, making small metallic sounds as they scattered. I knelt to gather them, though I couldn't explain why this seemed so urgently necessary. My fingers closed around shapes that felt both familiar and impossible, items that belonged to memories I wasn't sure were mine. As I crouched there in the darkness, collecting things I couldn't see clearly, the dripping sound changed its rhythm. It became more complex, almost like a code or language I'd once understood but had forgotten how to interpret. Each drop seemed to carry meaning, to be part of a larger message that remained tantalizingly just beyond my comprehension. The floorboards beneath my knees felt warm now, almost body temperature, and slightly soft, as if they were not quite solid. The sensation was deeply unsettling, but also strangely comforting, like sinking into something that had been waiting specifically for me. The boundary between the floor and my own body seemed to blur, making it difficult to determine where the house ended and I began. When I finally stood, the darkness had taken on a different quality. It wasn't the absence of light anymore, but rather a presence in itself, something with weight and intention. I could feel it pressing against my skin, seeping through my clothes, filling my lungs with each breath. The metallic taste had spread to my mouth, coating my tongue with a flavor that was both repulsive and oddly familiar. The dripping had stopped again, but the silence it left behind felt pregnant with possibility. I stood perfectly still, waiting for something I couldn't name, listening for sounds that existed just below the threshold of hearing. The attic space seemed to expand and contract around me, breathing with a rhythm that matched my own but preceded it by just a fraction of a second. I tried to remember exactly how I'd gotten here, what sequence of decisions had led me to this moment, but the chain of causation felt increasingly uncertain. Had I really climbed the ladder voluntarily, or had I simply found myself here, drawn by forces I couldn't resist or understand? The distinction seemed crucial, but the harder I tried to grasp it, the more it slipped away. The dampness on my hands had dried to a residue that felt sticky and permanent. When I tried to wipe it away, it seemed to spread rather than diminish, coating more of my skin with each attempt to remove it. The sensation was deeply unpleasant, but stopping the effort felt impossible, as if my hands were acting according to some imperative beyond my conscious control. Somewhere in the darkness, a floorboard creaked. The sound was definitely not caused by my own movement. I was standing perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. Someone or something else was in the attic with me, moving with careful deliberation through the space I'd thought was sealed and empty. The presence felt patient, as if it had been waiting for a very long time and could easily wait longer. I wanted to call out to demand identification or explanation, but my voice seemed to have abandoned me entirely. The words formed in my mind but died somewhere between thought and speech, leaving only silence and the growing certainty that speaking would be a mistake of irreversible proportions. The creaking moved closer, following a path that seemed to circle around my position. Whatever was making the sound knew the attic's geography better than I did, avoiding the loose boards that had announced my own arrival, moving with the confidence of long familiarity. The pattern of movement felt almost ritualistic, as if it were following some predetermined sequence that would culminate in a moment I wasn't prepared to face. As I stood there, frozen between versions of reality that refused to reconcile, I realized that the choice between them might not be mine to make. The attic held its own truth, independent of my beliefs or preferences, and that truth was revealing itself with a patience that felt both merciful and terrifying. The dripping had been just the beginning, a gentle invitation to remember what I'd worked so hard to forget. The dampness, the photographs, the impossible darkness, they were all pieces of something larger, something that had been waiting for me to return and complete whatever had been left unfinished. The sealed doors hadn't been meant to keep anything out. They'd been meant to keep something in, something that had finally found a way to call me back. Story 4. Every morning I would lay out 4 pieces of toast, each perfectly aligned on the kitchen counter, a simple ritual that marked the start of my day. I never questioned why I always did it that way. It was just how things were. Last week there was an extra slice, slightly off-kilter, resting at the edge like a forgotten thought. I dismissed it as an anomaly, a result of early morning grogginess. The next day there were only 3, yet I could have sworn I placed 4. This morning, as I stood at the counter, I found the toast perfectly arranged again, with one small discrepancy. A 5th crumb lay on the floor, out of place and lingering, as though it was waiting to see if I noticed. The crumb was darker than it should have been, almost burnt around the edges. I bent down to examine it more closely, feeling the cold tile against my knees. The kitchen smelled faintly of something I couldn't identify, something that didn't belong with the usual scent of butter and wheat. It was metallic, sharp, like the air before a thunderstorm. I picked up the crumb between my thumb and forefinger. It felt gritty, wrong somehow. When I looked up, the 4 slices of toast remained exactly where I had placed them, but now they seemed to mock me with their precision. The butter had melted into perfect circles, each one identical to the next. I had never noticed that before. The phone rang, cutting through the morning silence like a blade. I let it ring twice before answering, still staring at the toast. "Did you sleep well?" The voice belonged to my neighbor from across the hall. She called every few days, always with the same question, always with the same tone that suggested she already knew the answer. "As well as can be expected," I replied, which was what I always said. "I heard sounds again last night from your apartment around 3 in the morning." I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "What kind of sounds?" "Footsteps back and forth in your kitchen, like someone pacing." I looked down at my bare feet, then at the kitchen floor. The linoleum showed no signs of wear, no path worn by anxious steps. Yet as I stood there, I could almost feel the phantom ache in my legs, as if I had indeed been walking for hours. I was sleeping, I told her. Of course, she said, but something in her voice suggested otherwise. Just thought you should know. After she hung up, I found myself staring at the toast again. The butter had begun to congeal, forming small white islands on the surface. I counted them, 4 slices, 4 butter pools, but somehow it felt incomplete. There should have been more. I opened the refrigerator to put the butter away and noticed something odd. The milk carton was facing backward, its expiration date hidden against the wall. I always placed it label forward. It was another one of those small rituals that gave structure to my days. When I turned it around, I saw that someone had written something on the back in pencil, so faint I had to squint to read it. Ask about the missing day. The handwriting looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. It wasn't mine, I was certain of that, yet something about the formation of the letters tugged at a memory I couldn't quite grasp. I set the carton on the counter next to the toast and stared at both, as if they might reveal their secrets through sheer force of observation. The apartment felt different now, charged with an energy I didn't understand. I walked through each room, looking for other signs of disturbance, other evidence that someone had been here while I slept. Everything appeared normal, yet nothing felt right. The books on my shelf were in the correct order, but one had been pulled out slightly, just enough to break the perfect line. The bathroom mirror was clean, but there was a single fingerprint near the bottom corner, too small to be mine. I returned to the kitchen and found that one of the toast slices had fallen to the floor. It lay butter side down, leaving a greasy stain on the linoleum. I was certain it had been secure on the counter when I left the room. The remaining 3 slices sat undisturbed, their butter now completely solid. The metallic smell had grown stronger. I opened the window above the sink, hoping fresh air might clear my head, but the scent seemed to cling to everything, embedding itself in the fabric of the apartment. It reminded me of something, a memory hovering just beyond reach, like trying to remember a dream after waking. I picked up the fallen toast and threw it in the garbage, then immediately regretted the action. What if it had been evidence of something, but evidence of what? I was alone in my apartment, had been alone for as long as I could remember. The locks were secure, the windows undisturbed, yet someone had been here, or I was losing my mind. Neither possibility offered much comfort. The neighbor called again that afternoon. This time her voice carried a different quality, more urgent, less routine. I need to ask you something, she said, about last week. Do you remember what happened on the day you didn't answer your door? I frowned, searching my memory. I don't know what you mean. I've been here every day. No, you haven't. There was a whole day when no one saw you. No sounds from your apartment, no lights in the evening. I knocked several times because I was worried. The phone felt heavy in my hand. I could recall no such day, no period of absence from my routine. My memory of the past week seemed complete, unbroken. Yet as I tried to focus on specific details, they became slippery, elusive. What day was this? I asked. I'm not sure, time gets confused sometimes, but it was definitely last week. The police came by, asked if I'd seen you. Police, the word sent a chill through me. Why would the police be looking for me? They didn't say, just asked questions about your habits, whether you seemed troubled, if you had visitors. After she hung up, I sat in my kitchen chair, staring at the remaining 3 pieces of toast. They had begun to curl at the edges, becoming stale and unappetizing. The butter had separated, leaving small pools of oil on the surface. I tried to remember making them that morning, tried to recall the simple act of placing bread in the toaster, spreading butter with the knife, arranging them in their perfect line. The memory felt thin, insubstantial. I opened my desk drawer, looking for something that might anchor me to reality. Inside, I found my daily planner, a small leather-bound book where I recorded appointments and tasks. I flipped to the previous week, expecting to see my usual notations: grocery shopping, bill payments, the mundane details of a solitary life. Instead, I found a gap. One page had been torn out cleanly, leaving only the ragged edge where it had been attached to the binding. The pages before and after contained my familiar handwriting, but the missing day remained a void, unexplained and unexplainable. I ran my finger along the torn edge, feeling the sharp paper against my skin. Someone had removed that page, but who and why? The only explanation was that I had done it myself, but I could recall no reason for such an action. The missing page felt like a wound in my memory, a deliberate excision of something important. That evening I found myself standing in the kitchen again, drawn by an impulse I didn't understand. The 3 remaining pieces of toast sat exactly where I had left them, now completely inedible. I should have thrown them away hours ago, but something prevented me from disturbing them. They had become evidence, though of what crime I couldn't say. The metallic smell was stronger now, almost overwhelming. I traced it to the area near the refrigerator, where it seemed to emanate from the floor itself. I got down on my hands and knees, pressing my nose close to the linoleum. The scent was definitely coming from beneath the surface, as if something had seeped through the flooring and was slowly releasing its essence into the air. I found a screwdriver in the utility drawer and pried up one corner of the tile. Underneath, the subflooring was stained dark, the wood warped and discolored. The metallic smell rushed out like a held breath, making me dizzy. I replaced the tile quickly, but the damage was done. I now knew that something had happened in this kitchen, something that had left a permanent mark. The phone rang again. This time I let it go to the answering machine. Through the thin walls, I could hear my neighbor's voice leaving a message, but I couldn't make out the words. Her tone sounded different, more insistent, almost frightened. I played the message back later, when darkness had settled over the apartment like a heavy blanket. Her voice came through the speaker, distorted and strange. "I remembered something," she said, "about that missing day. There was a smell coming from your apartment through the ventilation system. It was like copper pennies or blood. I should have called someone then, but I didn't want to intrude. I keep thinking about it now, wondering if I should have done something different." Blood, the word hung in the air long after the message ended. I looked at the 3 pieces of toast, now curled and brown, and tried to imagine what they might have witnessed. Had they been here during whatever event had stained my kitchen floor? Were they silent observers to something I couldn't remember? I walked to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked normal, familiar, but my eyes seemed different somehow, as if they belonged to someone else. I searched for scratches, bruises, any sign of violence or struggle, but found nothing. My hands were clean, my fingernails short and neat. Whatever had happened, it had left no visible trace on my body. But as I turned away from the mirror, I caught sight of something that made me freeze. There on the bathroom wall behind me was a small smear at shoulder height. It was barely visible, the same color as the paint, but with a different texture that caught the light differently. I touched it with my finger and felt the slight roughness of something that had dried and been partially cleaned away. The smear was roughly the size of a handprint, as if someone had leaned against the wall for support. I tried to match my own hand to the mark, but it was too small, the fingers too delicate. It belonged to someone else, someone who had been in my bathroom during that missing day I couldn't remember. I returned to the kitchen and sat at the table, staring at the toast until my eyes watered. The apartment felt like a crime scene now, full of evidence I couldn't interpret. Every surface might hold secrets. Every shadow might conceal the truth about what had happened during those lost hours. The neighbor's voice echoed in my mind. The police had been here asking questions about me, about my habits and visitors. The implication was clear, though I didn't want to acknowledge it. Someone was missing or hurt or worse, and somehow I was connected to their disappearance. I tried to construct a timeline, to piece together the fragments of memory and evidence into something coherent. But every attempt led to the same blank space, the same missing day that refused to reveal itself. It was as if someone had reached into my mind and surgically removed a crucial piece, leaving me to stumble around the edges of a truth I couldn't grasp. The toast sat on the counter like an accusation. 4 pieces every morning, a ritual as automatic as breathing. But that morning there had been 5, then 3, then 4 again with the extra crumb on the floor. Someone else knew about my routine, had deliberately disrupted it as a message or a warning. But who, and what were they trying to tell me? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. The neighborhood was quiet, ordinary, the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever happened. Yet something had happened here in this kitchen during that missing day. Something that had stained the floor and brought the police to my door and left a handprint on my bathroom wall. As I watched, a figure emerged from the shadows across the street. It was too dark to make out details, but something about the person's posture seemed familiar. They stood motionless for several minutes, looking up at my window, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness as quietly as they had appeared. I remained at the window long after they were gone, wondering if I had imagined the encounter. But the feeling of being watched lingered, settling into my bones like a chill that wouldn't leave. Someone knew what had happened during my missing day. Someone was waiting to see what I would remember, what I would discover, what I would do next. The 3 pieces of toast had finally begun to mold, small green spots appearing on their surfaces like tiny bruises. I knew I should throw them away, should clean the counter and return to my normal routine, but I couldn't bring myself to disturb them. They were the only constant in a world that had suddenly become uncertain, the only proof that some part of my ritual remained intact. Tomorrow I would make 4 pieces of toast again, arrange them in their perfect line, and wait to see what message they might bring. Because now I understood that someone was trying to communicate with me through these small disruptions, these tiny violations of my ordered world. And until I decoded their meaning, until I recovered that missing day and understood what role I had played in whatever had happened, I would remain trapped in this liminal space between memory and forgetting, between innocence and guilt. The metallic smell seemed to pulse with my heartbeat, a constant reminder that the truth lay just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. But as I prepared for bed, I found myself hoping that some secrets were better left buried, some memories better left forgotten. Because the alternative, the possibility that I already knew what had happened and was simply refusing to remember, was too terrible to contemplate. The apartment settled into silence around me, but it was not the peaceful quiet of before. It was the silence of held breath, of secrets waiting to be revealed, of a truth that refused to stay hidden much longer. Story 5. The initial sweep confirmed undisturbed entry points. Items within the premises remained orderly, aligned according to routine habitation. A single untouched plate rested on the kitchen table, its surface unstained, adjacent to a fork and knife aligned parallel. The digital clock on the microwave persisted at 12:00, yet no evidence of a power failure was found. The thermostat maintained an even temperature, despite the thermostat's dial being unresponsive. All closets and drawers were intact, clothes methodically arranged. The surveillance system recorded no activity. However, a faint aroma of smoke lingered with no visible source. The windows were sealed, yet the curtains fluttered imperceptibly. I remember standing in that doorway, clipboard pressed against my chest, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The house felt like a museum exhibit, everything perfect, everything in its place. Too perfect, maybe, but that's getting ahead of myself. Let me explain what I believed happened that morning. I arrived at the property for a routine inspection, the kind I'd done hundreds of times before. Insurance companies hire people like me to verify claims, to document conditions, to ensure everything matches the paperwork. Simple work usually. Walk through, take photos, file a report. The homeowner had filed a claim about mysterious disturbances, items moving, unexplained sounds, that sort of thing. Insurance fraud, most likely. People get creative when they need money. The key was exactly where the homeowner said it would be, under the ceramic planter by the front steps. The lock turned smoothly. No signs of forced entry, no scratches on the metal, no splintered wood around the frame. I made my notes methodically, the way I always do. Inside, the house breathed with the stillness of recent abandonment. Not the deep, settled quiet of a place left empty for months, but the shallow silence of someone who'd stepped out just moments before. The air conditioning hummed steadily. A coffee maker sat half full on the counter, the liquid still warm when I tested it with the back of my hand. The homeowner had mentioned strange occurrences beginning 3 weeks prior. Furniture found rearranged in the morning. Doors left open that had been closed the night before. The smell of cooking food when no one had been in the kitchen. Classic signs of either a very elaborate hoax or someone experiencing significant stress. I'd seen it before, people under financial pressure, relationship troubles, health scares. The mind plays tricks. But as I moved through the rooms, taking photographs and measurements, something felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The living room contained all the expected elements. Sofa facing the television, coffee table centered on a faded rug, bookshelves lined with novels and photo frames. Yet the arrangement seemed somehow staged, like furniture in a showroom rather than a home where someone actually lived. The magazines on the coffee table were stacked too neatly. The throw pillows showed no indentations from use. I photographed everything anyway. Insurance companies want documentation, not intuition. The kitchen held that single plate I'd noted in my initial sweep, positioned precisely in the center of the small dining table. The fork and knife lay parallel beside it, equidistant from the plate's edge. No crumbs, no water spots, no fingerprints on the surface. Either the homeowner was obsessively neat, or this place setting had been arranged specifically for my visit. That's when I first noticed the smoke smell. It wasn't the acrid scent of something burning, but the lingering sweetness of wood smoke, like the aftermath of a fireplace. But the house had no fireplace. I checked every room twice, looking for a wood-burning stove, a chimney, anything that might explain the aroma. Nothing. The smell seemed strongest near the back bedroom, though it faded whenever I tried to focus on it directly. Like trying to look at something in your peripheral vision, the harder you concentrate, the more elusive it becomes. I completed my inspection systematically, photographing each room from multiple angles, testing windows and doors, examining the electrical systems. Everything functioned normally. The surveillance system showed no recorded activity for the past week, just static shots of empty rooms and hallways. The homeowner's claim appeared to be fabricated. But then I found the journal. It wasn't mentioned in the claim paperwork, and I almost missed it entirely. a slim notebook tucked between two thick novels on the bedroom bookshelf, its spine unmarked. I wouldn't have noticed it except that it was the only book not perfectly aligned with the others. It protruded maybe half an inch, just enough to catch my eye. Inside, handwritten entries documented the same disturbances the homeowner had reported to the insurance company. But these entries were dated months earlier than the official claims suggested, and the handwriting changed subtly from entry to entry, as if written by different people or by the same person in different states of mind. The first entries were neat, controlled. Found kitchen chairs rearranged this morning, all four pushed against the far wall. Woke to find bedroom door open, certain I closed it before sleep. Later entries grew more frantic. The smoke smell is stronger now. Can't find the source, checked everything twice. Someone is moving through the house at night, footsteps in the hallway, but when I look, nothing. The final entry, written in shaky letters. I think I'm the one doing these things. I think I'm losing time. That's what I believed I found. That's the story that made sense. But even as I write this now, I'm not certain about the journal. Did I actually find it, or did I imagine it? When I tried to locate it again before leaving the house, I couldn't. The bookshelf showed no gap between the novels, no space where a notebook might have been hidden. And there are other details that don't align properly in my memory. I remember the coffee maker being half full and warm, but I also remember it being empty and cold to the touch. I remember photographing the living room in bright afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, but my camera's timestamp shows I was there in the early morning, and the photos show rooms lit only by artificial light. The smoke smell comes and goes in my recollection. Sometimes I remember it as sweet wood smoke. Other times it was the harsh smell of electrical burning or the organic scent of leaves smoldering in autumn. And the curtains, I wrote in my initial notes that they fluttered imperceptibly, but the windows were sealed. I remember watching them move just barely, as if touched by the slightest breeze. But I also remember them hanging perfectly still, heavy and undisturbed. There's another version of that morning, one that surfaces in fragments when I'm not trying to remember it directly. In this other version, I didn't arrive alone. I can almost see another figure moving through the house with me, just out of my direct vision. Someone else taking photographs, someone else opening drawers and cabinets. When I turned to speak to this person, I found myself addressing empty air, but the sense of their presence lingered. In this version, the house wasn't empty at all. Someone was there, watching from doorways, following just behind me as I moved from room to room, not hiding exactly, but existing just outside my ability to perceive them clearly. The smoke smell in this version came from cigarettes. Someone smoking just around the corner, just in the next room, always one step ahead of my investigation. I would enter a room and catch the fading scent of tobacco, see a slight haze near the ceiling, but never find the smoker. And the journal in this version, I didn't find it on the bookshelf. I wrote it myself, standing at the kitchen counter, documenting disturbances I was witnessing in real time. My own handwriting, my own observations, but somehow unfamiliar, as if someone else was guiding my hand across the pages. The surveillance system, rather than showing empty rooms, showed me moving through the house repeatedly. The same inspection, over and over, recorded from multiple angles, but in some of the recordings I was accompanied by that figure I couldn't quite see. 2 sets of footsteps, 2 shadows, but only one person clearly visible. When I try to access this version of events directly, it dissolves. It exists only in the spaces between conscious thought, in the moments when my mind wanders and my guard drops. The rational explanation is that I was overtired, stressed from too many similar assignments, perhaps affected by something environmental in the house, a gas leak, maybe, or some other factor that influenced my perception and memory. Insurance investigators aren't immune to the power of suggestion, and I'd read the homeowner's claim before arriving. Maybe I unconsciously created evidence to support their story. But that doesn't explain the photographs. When I developed the film from that inspection, half the images showed rooms I don't remember entering. A basement that wasn't mentioned in the house's floor plan, an attic space accessible only through a narrow panel in the bedroom ceiling. In these photos, the rooms appear lived in, occupied, personal items scattered on surfaces, unmade beds, dishes in the sink. Yet I have no memory of taking these photographs. The insurance company accepted my report without question. I documented no evidence supporting the homeowner's claim of mysterious disturbances. The case was closed, the claim denied. Standard procedure, standard outcome. But I kept copies of all the photographs, and I returned to them frequently. The more I study them, the less certain I become about what actually happened in that house. In some images, the living room furniture appears exactly as I remember it staged and unused. In others, the same room shows clear signs of habitation, cushions indented from use, books left open on tables, a coffee cup half empty on the mantel. The kitchen photos are even more disturbing. The single plate I documented so carefully appears in some images exactly as I described plain, positioned precisely in the center of the table. But other photos show the same table set for 2 people, with food on both plates as if I'd interrupted a meal in progress. I've had the photos examined by experts looking for signs of digital manipulation or double exposure. The images are authentic, taken with the same camera during the same time period, but they document 2 different versions of the same spaces. The homeowner never responded to the insurance company's denial. No appeal was filed, no additional claims submitted. It was as if the entire matter had been forgotten immediately after my inspection. I tried to contact them directly, hoping to clarify some of the inconsistencies in my report, but the phone number on file had been disconnected. The address I'd visited was listed as vacant in city records, with no record of recent occupancy. When I drove back to the house weeks later, I found it exactly as I'd left it, or as I remembered leaving it. The key was still under the ceramic planter, the door unlocked smoothly. Inside, everything remained in perfect order. But this time I noticed things I'd missed before, or things that hadn't been there before, I can't be sure which. A second coffee cup in the kitchen sink, unwashed. Footprints in the carpet leading from the front door to the back bedroom, too small to be mine. The faint impression of a head on one of the throw pillows in the living room. And the smell of smoke was stronger now, definitely wood smoke, sweet and warm, as if someone had been burning papers in the backyard just before my arrival. I found myself moving through the house differently this time, not as an inspector documenting conditions, but as someone searching for answers to questions I couldn't articulate. I opened drawers I'd left closed, moved furniture I'd left untouched, looking for some evidence of what had really happened during my first visit. In the bedroom closet, behind a row of hanging clothes, I discovered a small door I hadn't noticed before. It opened onto a narrow storage space that ran the length of the house's back wall. Inside, boxes of photographs and documents, none of them mentioned in the insurance paperwork. The photographs showed the house as it must have looked when actually occupied. Furniture arranged for comfort rather than display, personal items scattered naturally throughout the rooms, people I didn't recognize sitting on the sofa, standing in the kitchen, sleeping in the bedroom. But in several of the photos I recognized myself. Not recent images, but photos that appeared to have been taken years earlier, showing me in the same rooms I'd inspected, wearing the same clothes, carrying the same clipboard. As if I'd been visiting this house regularly for much longer than I remembered. The documents were more disturbing. Insurance reports filed under my name, documenting multiple inspections of the same property over a period of several years. Each report described the same conditions, everything in perfect order, no evidence of disturbances, claim denied. But I had no memory of any inspection other than the one I'd conducted recently. According to these documents, I'd been investigating the same claim filed by the same homeowner repeatedly. The dates on the report suggested I'd been visiting this house regularly for the past 3 years, always reaching the same conclusion, always filing the same denial. The handwriting on all the reports was unmistakably mine. I left the house that second time with more questions than answers, carrying copies of the photographs and documents I'd found. But when I tried to examine them the next morning, the images had faded to blank paper and the text on the documents had become illegible, as if they'd never contained any information at all. Now, weeks later, I'm no longer certain which version of events actually occurred. Did I conduct a single, routine inspection of an empty house, or have I been visiting that property repeatedly for years? Did I find evidence of the homeowner's claims, or did I fabricate that evidence myself? The rational part of my mind insists on the first version, the straightforward explanation that fits with my professional experience and training. But the other version feels equally real, equally true. And sometimes, late at night when I'm trying to fall asleep, I smell that sweet wood smoke again, as if someone nearby is burning papers, destroying evidence of something I'm not supposed to remember. I still have the key to that house. It sits on my desk now, next to this report I'm not sure I'll ever file. Sometimes I think about going back one more time, conducting one final inspection to resolve the contradictions in my memory. But I'm afraid of what I might find there, or what might find me. The truth is, I'm no longer certain whether I was investigating that house, or whether it was investigating me. Story 6. It sounded like a needle caught in an endless loop of thread, a quiet word that seemed to stitch its way into the air. I stood in the doorway, my fingers brushing against the light switch, feeling the unexpected scratch of fabric beneath them. The noise persisted, weaving through the stillness of the room, each rotation tugging at the edges of my memory where clarity once dwelled. I moved toward the sound, the carpet strangely soft underfoot, drawing me with each muted spin. I hadn't heard that pattern since before the room changed, and yet here it was, unmistakable, unrelenting. The sewing machine sat in the corner where the desk used to be. Its chrome body caught the afternoon light streaming through the window, throwing small rainbows across the wall in fractured patterns. The fabric feeding through its mechanism was a deep burgundy, the kind of color that looks black in shadows but reveals itself as wine when touched by sun. I remembered purchasing that machine for her birthday, how her eyes had lit up with genuine surprise. She'd always wanted to make quilts, she said. Something to leave behind, something lasting. The The machine hummed with the same contentment I'd seen in her face that day, methodical and purposeful. The burgundy fabric pooled on the floor in careful folds. When I knelt to examine it, the material felt heavier than it should have, weighted with something more than thread and cotton. The pattern emerging from the machine's work was intricate, almost maze-like, with stitches that seemed to follow no logical sequence. Each line connected to another in ways that made my eyes water when I tried to trace them. She had always been precise in her needlework, every stitch measured and deliberate. This looked different. Frantic, as if the machine had been running without guidance, creating something that defied her usual careful planning. The thimble on the windowsill caught my attention next. Silver and dented, it bore the tiny scratches of countless hours of use. I picked it up, feeling its familiar weight in my palm. It was warm, as if recently worn, though the room had been empty when I arrived. The warmth seemed to pulse against my skin, a rhythm that matched the machine's steady whirring. She used to wear it on her middle finger, always the middle finger, because her index finger was too thick from an old injury. The injury she'd gotten from the garden shears, she claimed, though I couldn't recall her ever mentioning it until after the questions began. The garden shears themselves lay on the table beside spools of thread. Clean and sharp, their blades reflected the room's contents in miniature. In their surface I could see the sewing machine, the fabric, my own face peering down at them. But something in the reflection seemed wrong, distorted in a way that went beyond the natural warping of curved metal. My reflection appeared to be smiling, though I felt no inclination toward happiness. The shears had always been kept in the shed, among the other tools that gathered dust and cobwebs. Their presence here, polished and purposeful, felt like an intrusion into a space meant for softer things. The spools of thread were arranged in perfect rows, organized by color from lightest to darkest. Each one was wound with mathematical precision, not a strand out of place. She had always been particular about her supplies, treating them with the reverence others reserved for precious things. But these spools looked newer than they should have, their colors too vibrant, their surfaces unmarked by use. The burgundy spool, the one feeding the machine, was nearly empty, though I couldn't remember seeing it among her collection before. Its label was handwritten in script I didn't recognize, though something about the loops and curves seemed familiar. The chair positioned at the machine was pulled back at an angle, as if someone had just stood up from their work. The seat cushion still held the impression of a body, a shallow depression that suggested hours of patient sitting. I pressed my hand into the indentation, feeling the warmth that lingered there. The fabric of the cushion was the same burgundy as the material flowing through the machine, though I remembered the chair being blue, deep blue like the dress she'd worn to her sister's wedding. The wedding where she'd caught the bouquet and laughed about finally having her turn. The wedding photograph sat on the shelf above the machine, though I didn't remember placing it there. In the picture, she held the bouquet high above her head, her face radiant with joy. But looking at it now, something about her expression seemed different. The joy looked strained, forced, as if she were performing happiness rather than feeling it. The other faces in the photograph were blurred, as if the camera had moved during the shot, but her face remained sharp and clear. Too clear. As if she were the only real person in a room full of ghosts. The bouquet in the photograph was made of burgundy roses. I stared at this detail, my mind struggling to reconcile what I saw with what I remembered. The bouquet had been white, white roses, white ribbons, white everything. She had insisted on white for the wedding, said it represented new beginnings. But the flowers in the photograph were undeniably red, their petals dark as dried blood. When I touched the glass covering the photo, my fingerprint left a smear that seemed to darken the image even more. The roses on the windowsill were wilted but still fragrant. Their burgundy petals had begun to drop, creating a small carpet of decay on the sill. The smell was sweet but cloying, like perfume left too long in a closed room. She had always loved roses, filled the house with them during their season. These looked like they'd been cut from the garden recently, though the garden had been neglected since the investigation began. Weeds had overtaken the flower beds, and the rose bushes had grown wild and thorny. Yet here were fresh cuts, their stems still weeping clear sap. The investigation folder lay half hidden beneath a stack of fabric samples. I hadn't noticed it at first, my attention caught by the machine's hypnotic rhythm. But there it was, manila and official, its edges worn from handling. Inside were photographs I'd seen before, statements I'd read until the words lost meaning, diagrams that mapped out timelines and possibilities. The detective had been thorough, methodical, treating each piece of evidence like a thread in a larger tapestry. But the tapestry he'd woven told a story I wouldn't accept. The photographs in the folder showed this same room, but different. In those images, the sewing machine was covered with a sheet, the chair pushed against the wall, the roses dead in their vase. The timestamp on each photo was from the week after she disappeared, when the house had been searched and catalogued. But that couldn't be right. The machine was running now, had been running when I arrived. The roses were fresh, their scent filling the air. The chair was warm with recent use. Time seemed to have folded in on itself, creating contradictions that made my head spin. The fabric samples beneath the folder were swatches of different materials, each labeled with careful handwriting. Cotton, silk, wool, linen. Each sample was small, perhaps 2 inches square, but together they formed a rainbow of textures and colors, all except one, a single swatch of burgundy fabric, larger than the others, unlabeled. When I held it up to the light, I could see that it had been cut from a larger piece, its edges frayed as if torn rather than cut. The material matched the fabric flowing through the machine, but this sample felt different, heavier, stained with something that had dried to a rusty brown. The brown stains were everywhere once I began to look for them. On the carpet beneath the machine, on the edge of the table, on the handle of the garden shears. Small marks that could have been rust or soil or something else entirely. She had always been careful about cleanliness, would never have tolerated stains in her workspace. But these marks seemed to have seeped into the very fabric of the room, becoming part of its character. When I touched one with my finger, it flaked away like dried paint, leaving a darker shadow beneath. The shadows in the room had grown longer while I'd been examining the evidence. The afternoon sun was slanting through the window at a sharper angle, creating pockets of darkness that hadn't been there before. In these shadows, the familiar objects took on different shapes, became things I didn't recognize. The sewing machine looked like a crouching animal. The pile of fabric resembled a sleeping form. The roses cast shadows that looked like reaching hands. I turned on the overhead light, but instead of banishing the shadows, it seemed to deepen them. The light switch felt different under my fingers than it had when I'd first entered the room. Instead of the smooth plastic I expected, I felt fabric again, the same scratchy texture that had surprised me earlier. When I looked closely, I could see that someone had covered the switch with a small piece of burgundy material, sewn in place with tiny, precise stitches. The modification was so subtle I might have missed it entirely, but once noticed, it seemed to dominate the room. Why would someone cover a light switch with fabric? What purpose could it serve? The purpose became clearer when I noticed the other modifications. The door handle wrapped in the same burgundy material, the window latch covered with a matching piece. Even the frame of the wedding photograph had been carefully wrapped, transforming its silver surface into something soft and dark. Someone had been systematically covering the hard surfaces in the room, creating a space that was entirely textile, entirely soft. A room where sharp edges and cold metal couldn't exist. A room designed for someone who feared being cut. The cuts on my own hands were small but numerous. I hadn't noticed them at first, too absorbed in my examination of the room's contents. But now I could see thin lines across my palms, tiny wounds that stung when I flexed my fingers. The cuts were precise, surgical, as if made by something very sharp moving very quickly. I couldn't remember cutting myself, but the evidence was undeniable. Small drops of blood had fallen onto the burgundy fabric, disappearing into its dark weave like water into sand. The sand in the small hourglass on the shelf was the same burgundy color as everything else in the room. The glass container was delicate, ornate, the kind of decorative object she might have purchased at an antique store. But I'd never seen it before, and sand wasn't naturally burgundy. Someone had dyed it, transformed ordinary grains into something that matched the room's obsessive color scheme. The sand was falling slowly from the upper chamber to the lower, marking time in a way that felt ominous. How long had it been running? How much time was left? The time on the clock above the door had stopped at 3:15. The hands were frozen in place, though I could hear the mechanism still trying to tick. The sound was arrhythmic, broken, like a heartbeat with an irregular pulse. She had always been punctual, conscious of time's passage. But this clock seemed to exist outside of normal temporal flow, marking moments that belonged to some other reality. When I reached up to adjust the hands, they wouldn't move, as if the clock had decided that 3:15 was the only time that mattered. The matter of her disappearance had never been resolved. The investigation had stalled, the lights had dried up, the case had gone cold. But standing in this room, surrounded by evidence of recent activity, I began to question everything I thought I knew. The official timeline said she had left the house that morning and never returned. But the warm chair, the running machine, the fresh roses suggested a different story. Someone had been here recently. Someone was maintaining this space, keeping it alive in defiance of the facts. The facts were laid out in the investigation folder, but they seemed increasingly unreliable. Witness statements that contradicted each other, physical evidence that pointed in multiple directions, a timeline that left gaps large enough for doubt to flourish. I had accepted the official version because it was easier than questioning it, easier than facing the alternatives. But now, surrounded by contradictions, I found myself wondering if the truth was something else entirely. Something that had been hiding in plain sight, disguised as ordinary objects in an ordinary room. The room itself was the final piece of evidence, the one that changed everything. Because I suddenly remembered that this room had been locked since her disappearance. The police had sealed it, and I had left it untouched out of respect for their investigation and my own inability to face the reminders of her absence. But here I was, standing inside, examining objects that shouldn't exist, experiencing activity that shouldn't be possible. The door behind me was closed, and when I turned the handle, it wouldn't open. The fabric covering it was warm to the touch, pulsing with that same rhythm I'd felt in the thimble. The rhythm was everywhere now that I listened for it, in the machine's whirring, in the clock's broken ticking, in the whisper of fabric against fabric. It was the sound of something alive, something that had made this room its heart. And as I stood there, surrounded by burgundy shadows and impossible evidence, I realized that the investigation had been asking the wrong questions. Not where had she gone, but where had she been all along. Not what had happened to her, but what was still happening. The sewing machine continued its endless loop, stitching together a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to unravel. Story 7. It always seemed like a quirky detail, not worth noticing, just the water's song outside my window. Every morning the river below would rush twice, a sudden surge that echoed the dawn, followed by a gentle retreat. The pattern felt like an unspoken promise that everything was as it should be. But yesterday the river's cadence changed. It surged a third time, unsettling in its novelty. Today the rhythm stumbled only one push, one retreat, and the stillness that followed felt too loud, as though holding its breath. I can't help but wonder what else might shift tomorrow. The nausea started before I understood why. A hollow ache that settled somewhere between my stomach and throat, persistent as morning fog. I'd wake with it already there, as if it had been waiting for me to surface from sleep. The taste of copper pennies on my tongue, the way my hands felt disconnected from my wrists when I reached for the coffee cup. She used to count things, I remember that now, though I'm not sure why it matters. Her fingers would tap against surfaces, tables, door frames, the steering wheel always in sequences of 3. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. The sound became background noise until it stopped, and then the silence felt wrong, like a song missing its chorus. The detective had small hands. That's what I noticed first when he sat across from me in that beige room with its fluorescent heartbeat. Not his questions, not the way he leaned forward with practiced concern, but how his fingers barely wrapped around his pen. He wrote everything down, even when I said nothing important. The scratch of ballpoint on paper became hypnotic, a metronome keeping time with my fractured thoughts. I told him about the morning routine, how she'd stand at the kitchen window watching something I could never see. Her shoulders would tense, then relax, then tense again. A rhythm like breathing, like the river's song. When I asked what she was looking at, she'd turn with that smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes, and say she was just thinking. But thinking about what? The memory slides sideways, becomes something else. Her hand on my shoulder, fingers pressing just hard enough to leave temporary dents in my skin. The weight of her touch felt like an anchor, keeping me tethered to a reality I wasn't sure I wanted to inhabit. She smelled like vanilla and something metallic, something I couldn't name then but recognize now as the scent of fear. The car accident happened on a road I'd driven 1,000 times. That's what they called it, an accident. The word felt inadequate, too small to contain what actually occurred. Metal twisted into impossible shapes, glass scattered like fallen stars across wet asphalt. The paramedic who pulled me from the wreckage had gentle eyes and steady hands, but when he looked at the passenger side, his expression changed, became careful, professional. I remember asking about her before I remembered why I should be asking. The hospital ceiling was composed of tiles with tiny holes, hundreds of them, like a connect-the-dots puzzle waiting to be solved. I stared at those holes for hours, trying to find patterns, trying to make sense of the chaos in my head. A nurse with a voice like warm honey kept checking on me, asking how I felt, if I needed anything. I wanted to tell her I needed the river to sing properly again, but the words wouldn't form correctly. They said I had a concussion. That would explain the confusion, the way memories felt like they belonged to someone else, the gaps where information should have been. But some things remained crystal clear, the way she'd stopped counting, how her fingers had gone still against the dashboard just before impact, the absence of her familiar rhythm in those final moments. The detective came back. Different day, same small hands, same scratching pen. This time he brought photographs, black and white images that looked like abstract art until I realized what I was seeing. He spread them across the table like tarot cards, each one revealing another piece of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to complete. Her seatbelt had been unbuckled. The information landed in my consciousness like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything I thought I understood. I tried to remember the moment before impact, tried to recall the sound of the belt clicking open, but there was only silence where that memory should have been. The detective's pen stopped moving. He looked at me with those careful eyes, waiting for something I couldn't give him. an explanation that made sense, a timeline that added up, but my thoughts felt like scattered puzzle pieces, some from the right box, others from games I'd never played. I found myself back at the river window, though I couldn't remember walking there. The water moved wrong, its rhythm broken like a clock with missing gears. One surge, one retreat, then nothing. The silence stretched between each cycle, pregnant with possibilities I didn't want to examine. She used to stand here watching. Now I understood what she'd been seeing. The pattern had been a countdown. My reflection in the glass looked like someone I'd met once but couldn't quite place. Familiar features arranged in an unfamiliar expression. Behind my ghostly image, the room felt too empty, too quiet without her constant counting. The absence of sound had weight pressed against my eardrums like deep water. The detective's questions echoed in the hollow space between my thoughts. Had we argued that morning? Had she seemed upset? Had I noticed anything unusual about her behavior? Each inquiry felt like fingers probing a wound I didn't know I had, searching for something that might not exist. But there had been something, a phone call she'd taken in the other room, her voice dropping to a whisper I couldn't quite catch. When I'd asked who it was, she'd said wrong number, but her hands were shaking when she put the phone down. Her counting became faster after that, more urgent, like she was running out of time. The crash played in my mind like a film reel with missing frames, the tree appearing in our path, my hands jerking the wheel, her silence where there should have been screaming, the moment between motion and impact when everything hung suspended, waiting for gravity to remember its job. Her seatbelt clicking open. Not during the crash, but before it. While I was fighting with the steering wheel, she was freeing herself from the one thing that might have saved her. The realization crept through my thoughts like smoke, impossible to grasp, but impossible to ignore. The detective had asked if she'd ever talked about wanting to hurt herself. The question felt obscene, too sharp for the soft-focused grief I'd been living in. But now, standing at her window, watching the broken river, I could feel the answer taking shape in the space between my ribs. She'd stopped counting because she'd reached the number she was looking for. The phone calls had been research, the shaking hands, the careful watching, the way she'd touched my shoulder like she was saying goodbye. All of it leading to that moment when she chose to unbuckle her safety, chose to let physics have its way with her fragile bones. But why hadn't she just gone alone? Why take me with her into that spinning metal chaos? Unless she hadn't meant to take me at all. Unless the tree had been meant for her side of the car, and my reflexes had simply rearranged the choreography of her exit. The nausea returned, stronger now, carrying with it the taste of understanding I didn't want to swallow. My hands found the window frame, fingers automatically beginning to tap. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3. Her rhythm, inherited like a genetic trait I'd never known I carried. The detective would come back. He'd bring more photographs, more questions, more careful silences waiting to be filled with confessions I wasn't sure I possessed, but I wouldn't be here to receive them. The river was calling, its broken song promising completion, promising an end to the counting that had started in my fingers and spread through my chest like infection. Outside, the water surged once, retreated once, then held its breath, waiting for the third beat that would make the pattern whole again. I understood now why she'd watched from this window every morning, understood what she'd been learning from the water's mathematics. Some rhythms could only be completed by joining them. The reflection in the glass smiled back at me with her expression, and for the first time since the crash, the nausea began to fade. Tomorrow, the detective would find my apartment empty, would add my disappearance to his growing file of questions without answers. But the river would sing properly again, and that seemed like the most important thing. My fingers tapped against the window frame, keeping time with a heartbeat that was learning how to stop. Story 8. The dull hum of the refrigerator ceased as I padded across the kitchen tiles. The floor was still slick underfoot from where I'd mopped an hour before, the clean scent of citrus momentarily filling my lungs. My eyes darted to the corner as a shadow shifted, a faint echo of movement that didn't match the silence around me. My fingers brushed the countertop, leaving a faint trail in the lingering moisture. The air felt too still, and as I retraced my steps, the texture of a particular creak seemed wrong under my weight. A step in the hallway groaned differently, almost hesitant, as if testing the air before settling again. I've been cleaning more often lately. The ritual of it calms me, though I can't say why I need calming. Water circles the drain in perfect spirals, carrying away whatever I've scrubbed from surfaces that already gleamed. My hands move without conscious direction, wiping down things that weren't dirty to begin with. The neighbor mentioned seeing someone in my yard. She said it casually, the way people discuss weather, but her eyes lingered on my face longer than necessary. I told her I hadn't noticed anyone. This was true, though I've found myself checking the windows more frequently, drawn to the glass by sounds that might be footsteps or might be branches. There's a pattern in the way dust settles on the windowsill. I've photographed it twice now, comparing the arrangements of particles like they might spell something if I look hard enough. The camera captures details my eyes miss, shadows within shadows that seem to shift between frames. My sister called yesterday, or perhaps it was last week. Time feels elastic these days, stretching and compressing without warning. She asked if I was eating enough, sleeping enough, taking care of myself. I answered yes to everything because the alternatives required explanations I don't have. The basement door sticks when the humidity rises. I discovered this by accident, pushing against it with my full weight before it gave way with a sudden, violent release. The sound echoed up through the house like a gunshot, and I stood frozen on the stairs for several minutes, listening to the silence reassemble itself around me. I found hair in the drain that wasn't mine, darker, coarser, twisted into patterns that suggested struggle or haste. I pulled it free with tweezers, examining each strand under the bathroom light before wrapping it carefully in tissue paper. It sits now in my desk drawer, evidence of something I can't name. The mailman has changed his route. Where he once approached from the left, whistling tunelessly, he now circles from the right, his footsteps quick and purposeful. When I wave from the window, he nods without meeting my eyes. His uniform looks different too, though I can't pinpoint exactly how. Sleep comes in fragments now. I wake to the sound of my own breathing, amplified in the darkness until it seems to fill every corner of the room. Sometimes there's another rhythm underneath it, slightly out of sync, as if someone else is breathing nearby. I hold my breath to test this theory, but the other sound always stops at exactly the same moment. The coffee tastes different since I changed brands, bitter where it should be smooth, with an aftertaste that lingers for hours. I've switched back and forth, comparing, but the wrongness persists. It's possible my taste buds have changed, though I can think of no reason why they would. I've started a journal recording details that seem important at the time, but lose their significance when I reread them later. The handwriting varies from entry to entry, sometimes neat and controlled, other times urgent and barely legible. I don't remember writing in the urgent style, though the ink matches my pen. The grocery store clerk watched me too intently last time I shopped. Her fingers lingered on mine when she handed me the receipt, and she commented on my purchases in a way that felt rehearsed. I bought nothing unusual, yet she mentioned each item as if it held special meaning. Bleach for cleaning, she said, plastic bags for storage, tape for packages. There are gaps in my memory that I'm only now beginning to notice. Entire conversations that others reference but that I can't recall having. Appointments I apparently made but never wrote down. A prescription bottle in my medicine cabinet for medication I don't remember being prescribed, though the label bears my name in familiar typeface. The floorboards in the living room have developed a new vocabulary. Each step produces a different note, creating accidental melodies as I move through the space. I've begun walking specific patterns to test the sounds, mapping the room's responses to my weight and movement. Some combinations feel almost musical, others discordant and wrong. My reflection in the bathroom mirror seems to lag slightly behind my movements. I turn my head left, and the mirror me follows a fraction of a second later. I've tested this repeatedly, trying to catch the delay in action, but it only happens when I'm not actively looking for it. The detective came by 3 times now, though I'm not sure what he's investigating. He asks questions about my routine, my neighbors, my recent activities. His notebook remains mostly closed during these conversations, as if he already knows the answers and is simply confirming details. I offer coffee each time, but he always declines. I've been finding things in places where I didn't put them. Small items mostly. A pen in the refrigerator, keys in the bathroom cabinet, a photograph tucked between couch cushions, showing people I don't recognize standing in front of a house that looks familiar from an angle I can't place. The sound of running water has begun to wake me at night, not from my own pipes but from somewhere nearby, a steady flow that suggests purpose rather than accident. I've checked every faucet, every connection, but my plumbing remains silent. The sound always stops when I get up to investigate. My hands shake now when I hold small objects, cups, utensils, anything that requires precision. The tremor is subtle but consistent, as if my nervous system has recalibrated itself to a new baseline of tension. I've started using both hands for tasks that once required only one. The yard looks different from the kitchen window than it does from the living room. The same trees, the same fence, but arranged in a way that suggests different distances, altered perspectives. I've walked the perimeter of the property, trying to reconcile these views, but the discrepancy persists. There's a smell in the house that comes and goes without apparent cause. Not unpleasant exactly, but unfamiliar. Earthy and sweet, like flowers left too long in water. I've checked every room, every closet, but can never locate the source. Air fresheners mask it temporarily, but it always returns. I found myself standing in the garage yesterday without remembering how I got there. The concrete was cold against my bare feet, and I was holding a shovel, its blade still damp with soil. My fingernails were dirty, though I couldn't recall doing any gardening. The back door was open, letting in the pre-dawn air. The phone rings at irregular intervals, always when I'm in another room. By the time I reach it, the caller has hung up, leaving only the dial tone's steady pulse. The caller ID shows my own number, which seems impossible, but happens consistently enough that I've stopped answering altogether. My neighbor's dog barks differently now. Where once it was a simple alert to passing strangers, it's become something more complex. A pattern of short and long barks that feels almost like code. The dog stares at my house while making these sounds, its head tilted as if listening for a response. I've started leaving notes for myself, reminders of things I might otherwise forget. but when I find them later, the handwriting looks strange and the content refers to activities I don't remember planning. Meeting someone at a location I've never visited, bringing items I don't own, completing tasks that make no sense. The mirror in the hallway reflects a door that doesn't exist. I've checked the wall behind me repeatedly, finding only smooth plaster, but the reflection persists. Sometimes the door appears to be open, revealing darkness beyond. Other times it's closed, with what looks like light seeping from underneath. There's dirt under my fingernails again this morning, and my shoes are by the back door instead of in the closet where I always leave them. The soles are damp with dew, suggesting I was outside before sunrise. My pajamas are clean though, showing no signs of outdoor activity. The basement smells different now, fresher somehow, as if the air has been disturbed and is slowly settling back into stillness. I rarely go down there, but the scent drifts up through the floorboards, mixing with the house's familiar odors in ways that feel significant. I'm writing this now because I need to record what I remember before it changes again. The detective will return tomorrow, I think, though I can't recall making an appointment. My hands are steadier when I write, as if the act of forming words calms whatever has been shaking inside me. The refrigerator has started humming again, but at a different frequency than before, lower and more insistent, like a question that demands an answer I don't know how to give. Story 9. It started with a sound, a hollow note of wood against wood, occurring precisely as I descended the stairs each morning. The fourth step would creak twice, an expected song in my daily routine, almost comforting. But yesterday it hummed differently, a softer tone, as if asking a question. This morning the sound stretched, almost like a whisper that lingered too long. I still hear it now, even when I'm far from the staircase. Something about it feels wrong. The kitchen window faces east, I think, or maybe west. The light comes in sideways now, casting long shadows that weren't there before. I remember standing at the sink, my hands wet, soap bubbles clinging to my fingers. Someone was speaking behind me, their voice muffled like they were talking through fabric. "You always do that," they said. Do what? I turned around, but the kitchen was empty. Just the hum of the refrigerator and that persistent dripping from the faucet I keep meaning to fix. There's a coffee cup on the counter, blue rim, chipped handle. I don't remember making coffee this morning. The liquid inside is cold, a thin film floating on the surface. When did I last drink from a blue cup? The cabinets hold white mugs, plain ceramic, nothing with color. Yet here it sits, like evidence of something I can't quite grasp. The stairs again, always the stairs. I find myself avoiding them now, taking the long way around through the back hall. But the sound follows me anyway, that wooden whisper echoing in rooms where no stairs exist. Sometimes I catch myself humming along with it, a melody I don't recognize but somehow know by heart. My reflection in the bathroom mirror looks different, not older, not younger, just shifted somehow, like a photograph that's been moved slightly to the left. I lean closer, studying my own eyes, searching for something I'm afraid to find. The person staring back seems to know secrets I've forgotten. "Are you listening?" The voice again, clearer this time. It comes from everywhere and nowhere, like sound traveling through water. I check the other rooms, but they're empty. They're always empty now. When did the house become so quiet? There's a notebook on the desk, pages filled with my handwriting. I don't remember writing any of it. The words talk about patterns, about sounds that repeat, about someone who used to walk these floors. My pen has traced the same phrase over and over. They knew something was wrong. Who knew what was wrong? The fourth step creaks again, even though I'm sitting perfectly still. Someone is walking down the stairs, their footsteps careful and deliberate. I hold my breath, listening to the familiar rhythm. Step, pause, creak, creak, continue, just like I do every morning, just like I've always done. But I'm not on the stairs. The blue cup appears in different places now. Kitchen counter, bedside table, windowsill. Each time it's been used, the coffee consumed by invisible lips. I wash it, put it away, but it returns like a faithful pet. The chip on the handle seems bigger, more pronounced, as if someone's been worrying it with their thumb. Memory fragments surface without warning. A conversation about leaving, about starting fresh somewhere else. Suitcases by the door, packed and waiting. The smell of rain against windows. Someone crying in the next room, their sobs muffled by closed doors and careful distance. I can't do this anymore, they said, or maybe I said it. The voices blend together now, mine and theirs, until I can't tell who spoke which words. The newspaper on the kitchen table is folded to the same page every morning. I don't remember subscribing to a paper, don't remember anyone delivering it. The headlines blur when I try to read them, words swimming like they're underwater. But there's a photograph that stays clear, a house that looks familiar from an angle I can't quite place. Footsteps in the hallway wake me at night. Slow, measured steps that pause at my bedroom door. The handle never turns, but I feel eyes watching through the wood. In the morning, I check for signs someone was there. The floorboards show no disturbance, but the air smells different, like soap and something else, something I should recognize. The stairs call to me during the day. I find myself standing at the bottom, looking up at the fourth step like it holds answers I'm not ready to hear. The wood grain forms patterns that shift when I'm not looking directly at them. Faces, maybe, or maps to places I've never been but somehow remember. You have to tell someone, the voice whispers, but tell them what? That my house makes sounds it shouldn't, that coffee cups appear and disappear like magic tricks, that I hear conversations I might have imagined. The blue cup sits on the counter again, still warm this time. Steam rises from the surface, carrying sense of morning and familiarity. I lift it to my lips, tasting coffee exactly as I like it. Sweet, but not too sweet, strong enough to cut through fog. Someone made this for me, someone who knows how I take my coffee. The realization sits heavy in my stomach. I live alone. I've always lived alone, haven't I? Photographs line the hallway, but some of the frames are empty now. Glass intact, backing secure, but no images inside. Just blank spaces where faces used to be. I remember hanging pictures there, remember choosing each one carefully, but I can't recall what they showed or why they mattered enough to display. The fourth step sings its wooden song, and this time I follow the sound. My feet know the rhythm, avoid the loose board on the seventh step, skip the one that squeaks too loudly near the top. Muscle memory guides me through a dance I've performed countless times. At the landing, I pause. There's a door I don't remember seeing before, or maybe I've been avoiding it so long it feels new. The handle is warm under my palm as if someone just touched it. The hinges move silently, well-oiled and cared for. Inside, the room is exactly as it should be, exactly as it was. Clothes in the closet, books on the nightstand, reading glasses folded neatly on the dresser. The blue coffee cup sits on the windowsill, catching morning light like a prism. This is where they slept, where they read before bed, where they folded laundry on quiet afternoons, where they packed that suitcase, item by careful item, while I pretended not to notice from the doorway. I'll be back, they said, or maybe they didn't. Maybe that's what I hoped they'd say instead of what they actually said. The room smells like them still. soap and coffee and that particular scent that clings to skin after sleep. I sit on the bed, feeling the mattress dip under my weight. The springs remember two people, but now they only support one. Downstairs, the fourth step creaks its familiar greeting. Someone is coming up to join me, their footsteps matching the rhythm I know by heart. I close my eyes and listen, counting each careful placement of weight on wood. But when I open them, the room is empty. It's always empty now. The blue cup sits on the nightstand, coffee still steaming. I reach for it with trembling fingers, lifting it to lips that remember its shape. The taste is exactly right, exactly as it should be. Sweet but not too sweet, strong enough to cut through fog. Strong enough to dissolve the pills that made everything quiet. The fourth step creaks again, that hollow note of wood against wood. But now I understand what it's been trying to tell me. The sound isn't asking a question. It's giving an answer I've been too afraid to hear. Someone walks these stairs every morning, their ghost feet finding familiar grooves in familiar wood. They make coffee in a blue cup, drink it while watching sunrise through kitchen windows, then climb back up to wait for me to remember. I set the cup down carefully, my hand steadier now. The notebook on the dresser falls open to a page I didn't write, words in handwriting that isn't quite mine. Some sounds never stop echoing. The fourth step sings its wooden song, and I finally understand why it feels wrong. It's not the sound that changed, it's me. I'm the one who's different now, the one who hears whispers where there used to be conversations, who sees empty frames where photographs used to smile. The house remembers what I've forgotten. The stairs keep count of footsteps that will never climb them again. And somewhere in the space between memory and forgetting, a blue coffee cup sits waiting for hands that will never hold it. But I still hear the footsteps, every morning, every night. The fourth step still creaks twice, still asks its patient question. And sometimes, when the light hits just right and the shadows fall exactly where they should, I almost remember the answer. Almost story 10. My hand met air where the knob should have been, an echo of movement without substance. The numbers on the display blinked out of order, teasing a memory of time lost. The rug, once unfaltering underfoot, creased in peculiar waves, hinting at pathways untaken, decisions unmade. Each breath felt borrowed, the rhythm mismatched to my own. And as the sun cast its long fingers through drawn blinds, the reflection in the glass shifted and smiled before I could. The coffee mug sits cold beside me now, its ceramic surface bearing the ghost of warmth from hours ago. I remember filling it this morning, or perhaps yesterday morning. The distinction blurs like watercolors in rain. The handle curves away from my thumb in an unfamiliar arc, though I've held this same vessel countless times. Steam once rose from its depths in spirals that reminded me of her hair when she'd lean over the morning paper, reading aloud the headlines that seemed so important then. The coffee itself has formed a thin film across its surface, reflecting the overhead light in fractured patterns that shift when I'm not looking directly at them. The kitchen window frames a view I thought I knew by heart. The neighbor's fence stands 3 boards higher than I remember, casting shadows that fall in wrong directions across the garden below. Those tomato plants we tended together have grown wild, their vines reaching toward something beyond the glass that I cannot see. The bird feeder hangs empty, swaying on its chain though no wind stirs the leaves. I filled it just days ago, watching the cardinals and finches dart between the branches in their eternal dance of survival. Now even the squirrels have abandoned their posts, leaving only the hollow sound of metal against metal as the feeder rocks in its solitude. Her reading glasses rest on the side table, lenses catching fragments of afternoon light. The prescription seems stronger than I recall, the magnification warping the wood grain beneath them into strange topographies. She complained about needing new ones, said the world was growing fuzzy around the edges, but these frames look pristine, as if they've never touched a human nose or felt the oil from anxious fingers adjusting them during difficult passages. The case lies open beside them, its velvet interior bearing no impression of long use, no familiar indentation where the glasses would settle each night before sleep claimed her attention. The telephone cord stretches across the floor in loops that form patterns I don't remember creating. It reaches from the kitchen wall to the living room, suggesting conversations held while pacing, the kind of restless movement that accompanies difficult news or uncomfortable silences. The receiver shows wear on the earpiece, a darkness where countless hours of listening have left their mark. I try to recall the last call, the last voice that traveled through those copper wires to reach my ear, but the memory slips away like smoke through an open door. Books line the shelves in arrangements that defy the alphabet, their spines creating a code I once understood but can no longer decipher. The dust patterns suggest recent movement, gaps where volumes once stood now filled with shadows that seem deeper than they should be. Her favorite novel sits at eye level, its pages swollen with moisture from some source I cannot identify. The bookmark protrudes from somewhere near the middle, marking a place she'll never reach again, or perhaps a place she never left. The margins bear her handwriting, notes in a script that grows increasingly illegible as the pages progress, as if her thoughts were dissolving even as she wrote them. The answering machine blinks with messages I haven't played, its red light pulsing in rhythm with something that might be my heartbeat or might be something else entirely. The counter shows numbers that don't align with my memory of how many calls we typically received. Friends checking in, appointments to confirm, voices from a world that continues its rotation despite the stillness that has settled over this house. I reach for the play button repeatedly, but my finger stops short each time, held back by an understanding that some words once heard cannot be unheard. Photographs cover the mantelpiece in silver frames that reflect light in ways that hurt my eyes. The images show moments I recognize but cannot quite place in the timeline of our shared existence. Her smile appears consistent across the years, but something in her eyes changes from frame to frame, a gradual shift so subtle that it only becomes apparent when viewing them in sequence. In the most recent photo, she stands beside me at what might be a celebration, her hand resting on my shoulder with a weight that suggests goodbye rather than greeting. The medicine cabinet in the bathroom holds bottles with labels that swim before my eyes when I try to read them. Prescriptions filled and refilled, dates that span months I cannot account for, dosages that seem to increase with each renewal. Her name appears on some, mine on others, but the handwriting of the pharmacist blurs the distinction between patient and caregiver, between treatment and prevention. The cotton balls in their plastic container have yellowed with age, and the thermometer reads temperatures for a body that no longer requires monitoring. Laundry waits in the basket, clothes mingled in ways that speak of shared loads and separate lives. Her blouses carry scents that have faded to suggestions, phantom fragrances that trigger memories of embraces and morning routines. My shirts show stains I don't remember acquiring, marks that could be coffee or something else entirely, something that required scrubbing but never quite disappeared. The fabric softener bottle sits nearly empty, its contents insufficient for the washing that remains undone. The calendar on the wall displays a month that feels both recent and distant, its squares filled with appointments written in two different hands. Doctor visits appear with increasing frequency as the weeks progress, their times and purposes noted in abbreviations that have lost their meaning. Her handwriting grows shakier with each entry, while mine becomes more deliberate, as if compensating for something that was slipping away even then. The last entry is circled in red, a date that stands alone without explanation or context. Dinner plates sit in the cabinet, their numbers reduced from the set we once displayed with pride. The remaining pieces show chips along their edges, damage that accumulated so gradually I never noticed when it was happening. The pattern, once vibrant and clear, has faded to pastels that barely distinguish themselves from the white porcelain beneath. I count them repeatedly, but the number changes each time, as if some invisible hand redistributes them while my attention wanders elsewhere. The garage holds tools arranged in order of increasing confusion. Implements I once knew by touch now feel foreign in my grip, their purposes obscured by time and circumstance. The workbench bears the outline of projects begun but never completed, shadows where familiar objects once rested. Her gardening gloves hang on their hook, fingers curled as if still grasping something precious. The car keys dangle from their peg, but the vehicle they once started sits silent, its battery drained from disuse. Music plays from a radio I don't remember turning on, songs that drift through the house like visitors from another era. The volume adjusts itself, growing louder during the quiet moments and fading when I try to focus on the lyrics. The station seems to broadcast only melodies we once danced to, as if programmed by someone who knew our history better than we knew it ourselves. The antenna extends toward a window that faces directions I cannot determine, seeking signals from sources that may no longer exist. The basement stairs creak under weight that might be mine or might be something else descending into darkness I'm reluctant to explore. Each step produces a sound that echoes longer than physics should allow, reverberating through spaces that feel larger than the foundation should contain. The handrail bears the smoothness of countless journeys up and down, though I cannot recall what drew us to those depths or what we left behind in the shadows below. Her jewelry box plays a melody when opened, its tiny dancer spinning in circles that mirror my own confusion. The compartments hold pieces I recognize but cannot connect to specific occasions or memories. Earrings wait in pairs for ears that will never wear them, their gems catching light from sources I cannot identify. The mirror inside the lid reflects a face that might be mine, aged by experiences that feel both lived and observed, as if I were both participant and witness to events that shaped us both. The thermostat displays temperatures that fluctuate without explanation, the house breathing with a rhythm all its own. Windows fog and clear in patterns that suggest presence and absence, the glass marked by fingerprints that could belong to either of us or to someone else entirely. The heating system cycles on and off according to needs I no longer understand, warming spaces that feel empty despite their familiar contents. And now the sun moves toward evening, casting shadows that stretch and bend like memories reaching for something just beyond their grasp. The light changes color as it filters through glass that has witnessed everything and reveals nothing, its golden rays illuminating dust motes that dance in patterns too complex for coincidence. The house settles around me with sounds that might be wood expanding or might be footsteps in rooms I haven't entered, movements that suggest I am not as alone as the silence implies.